Hello and welcome to the VST Finals Preview. We'll be breaking down all six divisions of the basketball finals. We'll be starting with the boys going from Open to D5, and then we'll slide into the girls doing the same Open to D5. And Kenny will be giving you his thoughts on how each of these matchups look for both teams, what they've been through, how they got here, and probably giving you a prediction or two along the way. We did do a bracket breakdown in the beginning where he gave a prediction for all of them. We'll kind of see if he still stands good, but stay tuned for next weekend when we do a full recap and we see exactly whose bracket lasted the longest. So we're going to jump right into it without further delay. We got a lot of meat on this bone. In the boys' open division, you have number 4 Taft against the number 3 Fairfax. And this number 4 Taft team had a lot of challenges in the year, and they faced each one head on. Probably none bigger than in league against Birmingham, and this rematch kind of showed that you don't want to give this team a chance to size you up. And now they're going to have quite a few days to size up this Fairfax team that's been giving everyone they faced fits. What do you got?
Yeah, so this matchup is intriguing for a couple of reasons. One, you always want to have teams that are kind of peaking at the right time. And when you look at Taft, Taft is, since their loss to Birmingham the first time they played, this team has won 9 games in a row. And you look at Fairfax, similar and on basically a similar streak. They've won 7 in a row heading into this matchup. So you're talking about two teams, very talented, peaking at the right time. We could be talking about a game that's very tight. These two teams are very evenly matched, even when you look at their common opponents from the year. Fairfax went 4-1 against common opponents. Taft was right there at 3-2, and one of those losses was on a last second shot, or they had a shot to win the game, or if they would have went 4-1 against common opponents as well. The thing that's very intriguing about this matchup is Fairfax is obviously the defending Open champions, and in some respects they probably felt a little disrespected at the fact that they were just a 3 seed coming into this bracket, seeing as how they were the defending champs. But they've kind of proven their mettle through the first 2 rounds. And how they've played against their competition. They survived a close one against a very familiar foe in Crenshaw. Then they handled business against Birmingham for the second year in a row. And now they're looking to go back-to-back. This is a team they beat King Drew in the final last year, 76-64, to take the 22 Open Championship. And they've got a chance to go back-to-back. But this Taft team, what's scary about them is this could be just the beginning of their championship window. A lot of their better players aren't even seniors. You've got players like Bishop Brooks. You got players. They got bigs. They got a lot of good talent that are still going to be here beyond this year. And this could just be the beginning of them trying to assert themselves as kings of the Open division. So it should be fun one.
Yeah, it should be exciting and enticing. It's definitely one of those finals that you kind of hoped for. But then again, we've talked about this Open division. Any of these 8 teams could be in the final, and there would be no argument, because they all had the ability to get here and say we belong in this final. And it just happened to play out the way it did. It's definitely going to be one heck of a matchup. And then we'll jump right into the D1 final. You have the Grant Lancers, who were the number 2 seed in their second straight championship game for these boys. They won City last year, and now they're facing the number 1 seed Venice Gondoliers. This Grant team believes they can beat anybody. They probably have a bit of a chip on their shoulder, thinking they had an argument to be in that open. And we said it in our bracket breakdown. Number one, Venice, Grant, Palisades, maybe even Gardena. These four teams had a chance to say maybe they belonged in that open division. Grant lost to Birmingham by 2 points earlier in the season. So they all believe they can play and should have been there. Um, the winner of this game in this final is going to have kind of that argument of, yeah, we think we were good enough.
Yeah, what I love about this matchup is you're talking about two city programs that have kind of proven their mettle over the last few years in terms of their ability to come up big in big spots. These are two teams that have a real pedigree for having strong showings throughout the season to place themselves in position to play for championships. I mean, Grant is the defending D1 champions looking to go back to back. Last year they handled Westchester and they beat a tough Westchester team who went open this year in the title game. And when you're talking about a team in Venice, this team two years ago were the runner-ups in D1. They lost to Chatsworth in the championship game. Last year, they were good enough. They slotted in the open. They lost in the first round. But like I said, losing in the first round in open is not any sort of negative blemish on your season, because if you were even good enough to even slot into that position with those top 8 teams, that means on any given matchup, you could win, you could lose. It still is a very good indicator of how good your program is to even get into open. So you're talking about two teams, and you're talking about two teams that, quite frankly, a bounce here or there. Like you said, Grant came very close to beating the Birmingham. Venice played some of these open teams tough this year. One or both of these teams easily could have been in open. And quite frankly, the winner of this game walks away with a city championship and says, hey, we probably should have been in that top 8. So expect a very competitive game here from two really good programs that are still on the rise. If it's possible to look at two teams that have played for championships within the last couple of years as teams that are still on the rise, but when you look at these rosters, there's young talent. Like, the window's not closing for either one of these teams. So it should be a very good game.
It should. It should. It'll be extremely exciting. That's one that I'm personally really anticipating watching. If I can fit it into that crazy weekend I have. Now, into the D2 final. This was tantalizing during the semis. We believed there was a chance that we could have had an All Valley D2 final. As we said in our recap, Cleveland and Kennedy fell short, and that gave us a Southgate and Eagle Rock final here in D2. Neither of these teams, are one to be slept on. Southgate was the 4 seed, Eagle Rock was the 3 seed. So it's not as if they really shocked the world in getting here, but they played tough. Southgate has kind of stormed away. They didn't have too much of a challenge coming in. Legacy seemed to be the one that gave them the closest run, and even Eagle Rock, they beat up on Marshall pretty bad, and it was a 10-point win over Kennedy. So they seem to be pretty fairly evenly matched coming in. What do you think?
Yeah, when I looked at the top 4 seeds, I looked at Rancho and Bravo and I said, I don't know if what I've seen this year made me a believer that they could get there. But when I looked at Eagle Rock and Southgate, I knew there would be potential pitfalls or traps there, especially for Eagle Rock side of the bracket, because you had Kennedy there, you had Marshall, you had teams like Marshall and Silmar there, which was a game that I kind of had circled in that second round, that the winner of that might potentially give Eagle Rock trouble. But it really honestly took for them to play Kennedy before they saw their first real struggle on this side of the bracket. And for Southgate, it was very similar. They kind of rolled through their first couple they rolled through Roybal. Legacy was sort of that trap game where a 4-5 matchup could kind of go either way, but they kind of showed their mettle and they powered through there. And then Cleveland, I thought Cleveland might be able to pull the upset there, but the road that they traveled, pulling 2 upsets, sometimes it's kind of hard to expect the team to kind of continue to stay that hot, and they just kind of ran out of gas. But when you look at the Southgate squad, and when you look at Eagle Rock, these are 2 teams. When I looked at 3, 4, 5, 6, sort of in that area in the bracket, I looked at those 2 teams and said, okay, if things kind of go so according to plan, if Cleveland doesn't upset the apple cart like I thought they would, that this would probably be the matchup we would land on, and it's going to be a very competitive game. These 2 teams are sort of mirror images of each other, and it's going to be interesting to see how the chips fall by the end of the day.
Very, very much so. It's going to be. I think that one's kind of going to be a bit of a dogfight between those 2 programs. And go right into D3 from there. We had another opportunity to potentially see an all-valley final here. Number 5 North Hollywood fell to Garfield, as we said in our recap. They played tough to get there, but weren't able to get the job done. And Arleta was the number 2 seed, so they seem to have a bit of a clear path coming in. And honestly, when you look at their way in, they weren't challenged all that much. They beat San Fernando by 13. They beat Northridge Academy by 37. And then they beat Marquez by 14. So Arleta hasn't seen that stiff kind of, jab in any of their matchups. And I'm curious, going up against Garfield, you got number 1, number 2. On paper, you would think they match up pretty well, but I mean, even Garfield wasn't challenged that bad either when you look at their run. So, 2 teams that kind of almost coasted their way in. I don't want to say that because you still got to play the games, but none of their opponents really pushed them to their limits. So now, as they try to push each other to the limit, that's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, when we sort of broke down this bracket, I had said back then, when I looked at the teams in this Division 3 field, I looked at maybe a NoHo or maybe a team like Marquez or Hawkins, one of those teams. Maybe they could upset the apple cart, but I felt like when you looked at Garfield and Arleta, the 1 and 2 seeds, I thought that the way things sort of broke down here, they would roll to the championship, and that's essentially what both of these 2 teams did. And not just that they were dominant, but they mirrored each other, which kind of tells you like this matchup was on a collision course. Both teams beat their 3 opponents by essentially the same average, about 21 points a game. Like it wasn't even close for in any of these matchups that they played in. But what's intriguing about this matchup is you're talking about a revenge tour for both of these teams. When you look at Garfield made it to the D3 semifinals last year and were a basket away from playing for a championship. They got knocked off by Robert F. Kennedy 57-55 in the semis. So that's probably been sitting with them all season long, and they've sort of kind of taken that momentum with them into the postseason. And then when you look at an Arleta team, they've got to be chomping at the bit for this matchup because they met Garfield in the second round in D3 last year, and Garfield just kind of wiped the floor with them. They beat them by basically 30 points. So the players who are still there that remember that know that not only is it a chance to get revenge, but it's the chance to get the ultimate revenge. We got our win back, but we got it back on you in the championship. So both of these teams are going to be primed and ready for this contest. They're going to know each other very well. And quite frankly, whoever gets down on the scoreboard, it'll be their first adversity of this entire postseason. So that's always intriguing as well to see how do you react to that sort of pressure of, okay, it's been smooth sailing so far, but now we're in a dogfight here. So I think it's going to be a great game.
Yeah, it's that is one for stories. There's all kinds of question marks coming in terms of facing adversity, but both teams have been dominant. So who's going to bend and who's going to break? I think that's going to be interesting to watch. That takes us into D4 and another matchup that you're not too surprised about in terms of their seeding. Number one, Sotomayor, again, didn't really face a challenge coming in. First, second round, Lake Balboa was a 36-point win. University Prep was 28 points. West Adams was 18. I mean, the margin of victory is getting lower as you go down, but it still doesn't speak to be much of a challenge when you look at the score lines. And same for Huntington Park. Their third round match, they beat up on Voss by 24. And then they beat Animo by 14. So similar kind of thing. Neither of these two teams have faced much adversity in the playoffs. They seem to be very, very evenly matched. And again, who's going to bounce back? Who's going to bend? And what are they going to do when they're faced with adversity?
Yeah, the story here in D4, similar to what we're going to kind of talk about with D5, is was there anyone who was going to be able to stop the train that is what the top seed was bringing compared to a lot of the teams they would see? And what we saw from Sotomayor is they just kind of rolled through this thing, and now they find themselves in the championship, and Huntington Park is the last sort of hurdle keeping them from what we thought might be a chance to kind of roll through here. Now, of course, for me, I'd looked at Middle College and I thought that maybe potentially they might be the team to land here, but they weren't able to avoid the upset the way that Huntington Park, quite frankly, did in the second round when they got a little bit of a scare from Maywood, but once they survived that, the next two opponents they kind of rolled through. So it's all about Sotomayor here. Like I think everyone's expecting them to win this matchup, but that's why you got to roll the balls out and play. I mean, Huntington Park is going to feel like they've got just as good a shot to win this game that Sotomayor does. So, I mean, we're going to just have to wait and see.
And we have the incomplete one. Again, we're recording this before the games are played. So D5, we have Port of LA waiting for the winner of New Designs and University Parkway. Port of LA has just romped its way into this game. We're talking, 92-65 over Alliance, 74-44 over NVMI, 56-45 over Triumph. And they clearly, from what I see, are the team to beat. Who knows? I mean, University Pathway was the number 2 team. And they have an upset-minded New Designs from Watts. Now, they've pulled the upset on everybody. So if New Design from Watts gets past University Parkway when they play this week, that's going to be some momentum that just rides on a run like this. You just kind of roll it over into the next one, and that belief starts to grow. So one of these two teams is going to be facing Port of LA and trying to end this dominant run of theirs in the playoffs.
Yeah. So it's all about Port of Los Angeles here. But full transparency, I did have University Pathways winning this bracket. Depending on what happens in this matchup against New Design Watts, that we would get that 1-2 matchup in the championship. But you got to give credit where credit is due. If you are a 1 seed and you have superior talent, no one should be able to really touch you when you get into the postseason. You really shouldn't have a struggle until you get to a quarterfinal or a semifinal. And quite frankly, that was the first time that someone was able to play them under 20. So they're going to be primed and ready. And not just that they're primed and ready, but just because of the kind of the wackiness with this bracket and how there was time in between certain games and games were played on different days. Port is also going to have a few days on their opponent, whoever wins this matchup, to have had time to kind of rest and be ready and prepared for whatever comes or whatever they're going to see. So, I mean, it's their championship to lose, but the winner of this matchup, like you said, if it's New Design Watts, look out. Like I said, every now and again you get a team that kind of figures out who they want to be when they get to postseason because hey, no one was expecting them to win anything. If it's University Path and if it's UPath, well, you know what? They survived that scare in the quarterfinals against Elizabeth, and sometimes that's what you need to kind of wake you up and realize, okay, we almost blew it here. Let's go ahead and handle business and get things done. So, again, when you look at all of these brackets on the boys' side, you can expect them to be competitive games as they should be when you get to the championship, and this division will be no different.
Now, before we wrap it up and jump into the girls, I have to say, when I was coaching, I preferred to be in a position like University Pathways and New Design Watts because you don't have 5-6 days in between games.
Yeah.
You play the game, you practice for 2 days, and then you're in the next game. And you really are able to roll that momentum and keep that focus going, especially if you're a team like New Design Watts coming off of the upset. You want to keep it rolling. You don't want your players to get, stagnant and have the idea of, well, we've been upsetting everybody, kind of get into their heads. No, you want the nose back at the grindstone. You want them focusing on the next matchup as soon as possible. So for me personally, I kind of give the edge to the winner of this matchup, even though Portobello has been dominant over everybody. Just for the focus and coming in hot, I'd say watch out to either of these teams coming in on a roll. And they have the ability to know exactly who they're facing, and their opponent doesn't. Portobello is kind of practicing against ghosts until there's a victory. Yes, they're sharpening their own game, making sure that any kinks in their armor are getting ironed out. But sometimes it helps to scheme against your opponent. Are they shooters? Are they weak against the zone D? Do they play certain man-to-man that you can exploit, or does their zone have holes in it? All the different questions of how you can break them down, they're not going to know, and they're going to have less time to prep. So, yeah, I would much rather be in that shorter time window. But I'm excited to see this one because there's going to be a definite big story coming out of it. Either you have Portobello dominating all the way, or you've got number one versus number two figuring something out, or the upset. And I'm here for all of it. So, and with that, we're going to jump right into the girls bracket, and there are some matchups that we just need to dive headfirst into, and not too much context. And I'm going to start with the open division. Like we said, it's going to be Granada Hills, the number 1 seed, versus the number 2 Westchester. Not much for me to say here. Granada Hills has been dominant for years. They've been essentially penciled into open at the start of every season, and open is theirs to lose. And this Westchester team has a chip on their shoulder because they believe they should have been number 1. And that's all I got to say. I'm going to let Kenny dive in.
So what's spicy about this matchup, aside from just the fact that the Open Division Championship, you're going to have 2 quality teams. But it's not just that there are 2 quality teams here in this championship game. It's the fact that these are 2 teams that have had a lofty expectation put upon them coming into the year, and for the most part, both of these teams have lived up to every bit of it, all the way up to this point in meeting each other in the championship. These 2 teams have a combined record of 53-5 this year. And like I said, and not only are they 2 quality teams, but there's a real familiarity here between these 2 teams because this is a rematch of the open semis from last season, which Westchester won over Granada Hills. So that also just kind of just adds fuel to that Westchester fire of, hold on, wait a minute. So we came this close to beating Birmingham last year and winning open. We've not run from any competition all season long. We went 28-1, and somehow we're not the top seed in open. And when you talk to people around that program, when you talk to the coaches and the players alike, this is the only matchup they wanted in the championship. Yeah, playing against Birmingham is nice, but they wanted Granada because, quite frankly, everyone's sick of they're the darlings here in the open. But look at our pedigree and what we've done the last couple of years. There's no program that touches us. And if you're Granada, you know that it's yes, they are perennial open, but they're trying to kick that door in and let everybody know, like, hey, this championship window is here, is open. We've got super freshmen who are going to be dominant in the West Valley and in the city section the next few years, and we've got the future, but we've also got the now. And quite frankly, when you look at this matchup, the city, the player who's going to win the open, or who's going to be the D1 player of the season, or player of the year, will probably be decided in this matchup. Because Westchester has a couple of girls who are kind of nominees for that award. We know what Marion Boko is for Granada Hills. So what happens in this game could go a long way and kind of being the sort of the separator, the decider of who that award goes to. And I expect this to be a barn burner of a game. I think these two teams match up so well on paper, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun.
Yeah. That is going to be one heck of a matchup. And that rolls us right into another heck of a matchup. Poly of Sun Valley versus Laces. And Laces, they didn't really get challenged too much. They beat El Camino pretty handily, and then they beat Cleveland pretty handily. And Poly took on Garfield and didn't really seem to be challenged by the final scoreline. And then came the physical, gritty, just in-your-face matchup with Hamilton in the semis. They punched their ticket. I'm gonna let you take it away because there's a lot more here.
Yeah, so I just wanted to dive into that game a little bit before we kind of go into the championship. I just wanted to take a moment because of what we do here at the Valley Sports Telegram, where we've gone out of our way to kind of shine a light on our schools and tell the stories like we say, we tell the stories no one else does. And this game to me was one of the most intriguing games that I've covered all season long, just because of a few reasons: the atmosphere, the game itself, and then some things that sort of happened or unfolded at the end of that game. Some negative, some positive that I want to kind of touch on. It won't go on too long, but I felt like this game really needed a bit of a spotlight to kind of talk about Poly a little bit and what they had done. So let's start with the atmosphere. We come on here every week and we talk about go out and support our kids, go out and support how hard they've been working and what they're doing, make it feel important, give them that, what they need to know that they have the support of the community. And you felt it here. Full transparency. I was going to cover both of those games in the D1 semifinals at Birmingham. On my way from my kids' practice, I get a nail in the tire. So I have to go fix the nail in my tire before I head to the game. By the time I got to the Cleveland Laces game, which was about a little ways into the second quarter, I had to stand against the wall for the remainder of that game because there wasn't a seat to be had in the house, which was just incredible to see the atmosphere, to see how everyone showed up for these girls. And that's exactly what we need to see. We need to see that every time these young women take the floor, not just for playoffs, but I'm going to give credit where it's due. The atmosphere was incredible. It was loud. People were cheering on the cheerleaders during the timeout breaks. It was amazing to see. And it was that way, not just for the first game, it was that way for both ends of the doubleheader. So that was incredible. The game itself, you want to talk about a tough, physical game. One, because familiarity breeds contempt. These teams played each other earlier in the year. Hamilton kind of beat up Pauley a little bit. Pauley hung tough. But coming into this rematch, they knew what they were going to need to do to be able to fight against a Hamilton team that was big. They've got numbers. They just have things that Pauley just doesn't have. But that didn't matter to Pauley. Pauley came right out, got in these girls' face. It was physical. No one was giving up any easy layup. Let me tell you, when you got fouled, it was playoff fouls to the point that both teams started to pile up. Both teams were in the bonus before the end of the first quarter. That's how physical this game was. The fouls were piling up for both teams. Now, in the first half, Pauley left quite a few opportunities out there. They missed some bunnies. They missed some free throws. They were down 20-19 at halftime when they could have easily been up 10 at halftime if they get a bounce here or there. And then the other thing that you kind of noticed is one of Pauley's Achilles heels all year is that their top end talent. We've talked about the twins. We've talked about the Leasing twins all year. They're as good as any players in the entirety of the city section, for my money. If you told me I had to go 2-on-2 for my life with the best players in the city, I wouldn't have any problem with the Leasing twins being my representatives. But what happens with Pauley is they only have like a 6 or 7 girl rotation. So when they go up against big physical teams, it wears on you when you don't really have girls that you can kind of sub in or out. And you started to see that wear on Pauley's legs midway through the third quarter. Both of the twins are cramping up. They got to kind of every time out, they got to get stretched out on the sideline. You could tell it was taking a physical toll on them. But what was incredible to see is that the others for Pauley stepped up big time. Their freshman Audrey, she started hitting big shots. Sophia Cruz started hitting big shots for them. So it wasn't just on the twins; it was the entire team sort of kind of came together and put forth an effort that helped them get over the hump. A big turning point in the game was Cameron Curl, Hamilton star player, picked up her 4th foul right at the beginning of the third quarter. And then she fouled out about 7 minutes with 7 minutes left in the game in the 4th quarter. So it quickly became a game of who else on Hamilton could kind of carry the load for them. And ultimately what was this deciding factor is that the role players for Pauley started to hit shots and Hamilton's role players really could not. And that was kind of the deciding factor. So it was a huge win for Pauley. It was a gutty win. It was a hard win. It was a program changing win in terms of the perception around this team changes when you win a game like that, because people are going to look and say this basically 7 girl rotation team played against a physical team that quite frankly could have went open and somehow not only got their revenge from the first matchup, but they took it to them in that 4th quarter and proved that they belong and proved that they belong to be in this championship. Now, that out of the way, we got to kind of talk about there was a dust up towards the end of the game. In a playoff game like this, emotions are going to kind of run high. They were running high. There was a lot of jaw jacking. There was elbows being thrown throughout the game. So essentially what happened with about 90 seconds left in the game, there was a diving for a loose ball. It got a little physical. Hamilton girls kind of took a little bit of liberties as you do sometimes when you're frustrated, when you're talking about kids. And Hart Leasing threw the basketball at the Hamilton player's legs. And as we all know, that's an automatic ejection. It was just sort of an ugly, and then there was some pushing, some shoving. It was really sort of an ugly end to a great game. It's unfortunate. It's no indication on on any of the young ladies involved. Sometimes you just kind of lose control of your emotions, especially in that sort of environment when it's a tough physical game. Somebody's got to go home. But I do want to shout out one thing before we move on. I want to shout out the response by the administrators in that atmosphere, because it was so packed and it was so emotional, coming from both sides of the stands, the Hamilton side and the Poly side. That thing could have gotten ugly, like we've seen some other situations get ugly this year with things that have happened sort of in the southern section. None of that happened at Birmingham, because all the administrators for both sides, for Hamilton and for Poly, immediately recognized how tense the situation was. Everyone jumped up, made sure no one came out of the stands, made sure no players left the bench, and it got resolved fairly quickly before anything else kind of got out of control. So in those sort of situations, you do want to give a shout out and give kudos to everyone involved for understanding that, you know what, we don't need to exacerbate those situations. Everyone has the capability of cooler heads prevailing, and we were able to get out of that gym without any incident. So to kind of sum it all up, thank everybody, all these Valley parents, administrators, for making sure that an intense playoff battle stayed just an intense playoff battle. There was no need for any ugliness. The only thing that really terrible to come out of it is because of the ball being thrown. Polly will lose one of their star players for the championship. She won't be available for the championship, and she won't be available for state, because she's going to have to serve a 3-game suspension. But again, that's no indication on the young lady's character. It was just a moment that we've all had as kids, where you're upset and you felt like someone took a shot at you. But I just hope that she understands that, mistakes are made. And I hope that she just is there for her teammates, helps them prepare for this championship, be there to support, and there'll be more games to be played. So yeah, that's so to roll that back into our D1 championship game. Yeah, it's going to be tough for Poly. It's going to be tough for Poly because, like I said, they have a short rotation, but and a short rotation is going to be even shorter because they're going to be missing one of their stars, and that's not necessarily the way you want to go ahead as this Laces team, who, I mean, this is a team that they participated in Open last year, so there's a pedigree with this team. They slid into D1 this year because not everybody can go Open, but that's how talented this team is. Now, I will say this: it wasn't so cut and dry, despite the final score against Cleveland. If there's anything for Poly to kind of glean from that contest, and I'm sure when they look at the film that they'll understand what I'm saying, is that Cleveland had opportunities even when they got down on the scoreboard. There were several points in the game when Cleveland had a lead. There were several points that even when they got down on the scoreboard, they were able to get it back to 4 or 5, but the turnovers just kind of got in the way of them being able to complete a comeback. So it wasn't as if Cleveland was outclassed. It was just that Laces played a cleaner game. So for Poly, they're just going to have to play mistake-free, and they're going to have to play hard. And after what they just did with Hamilton, they know they have the grit to do it. So I'm not expecting Laces to run away with this game. I expect this one to be a dogfight, because this team, not only now are they playing for a championship, but they're playing for their teammate, who in a lot of ways they'll feel was wronged here. So I still expect Poly to give them a hellacious fight in this championship against Laces.
That is going to be quite the challenge. Not necessarily an uphill battle, but that's going to be a fight that they're going to have to, grit their teeth, pin their ears back, and go. And that takes us right into the D2 final. Number 1 San Pedro versus number 2 Chatsworth. A 1 and 2 matchup. San Pedro did survive a tough fight with Carson in the 3rd round, and Chatsworth escaped a couple of battles themselves. The Kennedy game was an 8-point win in the third round, and then they escaped Wilson by 2. So this isn't a Chatsworth team that's kind of coasted. They've had to fight, and you got to be ready to fight when you're in the final. And this very well, could be another dogfight between these two. And again, what happens if San Pedro gets put on the ropes by Chatsworth? Be the first team to really, really kind of do that. The Carson game was close, but they haven't been pushed that far. So that would be interesting.
Yeah, the story of this game to me is simple. You have two programs here that are on that D2, D1 cusp. And both of these programs are kind of being built to want to be able to compete with the top end talent in the city, with the teams like Verdugo who made a similar ascent where they were D4 to D3 to D2 and going into D1. And in order to do that, this is the sort of game where you kind of seal that that's what your future is by going out and kind of handling business here. So this is two teams. When you looked at last season, quite frankly, Verdugo was the wall that neither one of these teams could kind of get past, with San Pedro losing to Verdugo in the D2 semis, and then Chatsworth putting up a good fight, but ultimately losing to Verdugo Hills in the D2 championship game last year. So these are the two teams, when you look at a natural progression, where Verdugo Hills sort of dominated for a few years and then they made that jump into D1. When you talk to these coaches, when you talk to San Pedro's coaching staff, and when you talk to Chatsworth coaching staff, they believe that that's the same sort of trajectory that their two programs are on. And this game is sort of that litmus test for both of them, because they're right there. They're on the cusp. When you watch San Pedro and when you watch Chatsworth, you see the talent is there. You see what they've been building. And now this is a chance for it all to culminate and kind of arrive and say, hey, we're with the big boys now. We're with the big girls that we want to be mentioned with them. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Chatsworth is going to feel like this is something this is destiny. They got to the championship last year. They lost by 10. But they missed 17 free throws in the game. So they felt like it was a missed opportunity last year. They'll get a chance to kind of make up for it this year. And when you talk about a team like Chatsworth, they've been the opposite of San Pedro. San Pedro kind of waltzed there. Chatsworth had to survive a revenge tour going up against a Kennedy team that they beat earlier in the year, and then Kennedy came and gave them their best shot in the playoffs. They played a Wilson team that they beat earlier in the year, and then Wilson gave them their best shot, and it took a last-second put back buzzer beater to kind of get here. So you're talking about a team that sort of kind of cruised, and maybe it's because they're that good, and a team that kind of had to fight their way here, and we'll see if that momentum kind of carries them and into a game that's going to be tough for both teams to win. So it's going to be fun.
Yeah, and fun kind of exemplifies the next matchup we're talking. In D3, you got number 1 George Washington Prep and number 2 Vaughn. Vaughn, as the team we were kind of keeping a closer eye on, they pushed through, and it was that third round matchup that we were really kind of looking at, Vaughn and Triumph, where if someone was going to kind of surprise them and upset them, it could have been Triumph. Triumph had a good year, and Vaughn outlasted them by 9, and then they outlasted Contreras by 6. So it's going to be interesting, and I mean, George Washington's coming off of a 12-point victory over Harbor Teacher. So both teams kind of, are where they should be in terms of, you're talking about progression of a program. Should be a good one.
Yeah, when you're talking about these two programs in George Washington Prep and in Vaughn, you're talking about two teams with D2, maybe even in some regards D1 talent, but just D3 numbers in terms of the size of their program and the number of girls they have in the program. And from Vaughn's perspective, they knew to win the D3 championship, they were going to have to go through Contreras, and they were going to have to go through George Washington Prep. They knew that coming into the postseason. So the first half of the postseason was not looking past opponents that they should beat. And then once they got past that little mini gauntlet, could they take care of Contreras and ultimately a George Washington Prep if they got there in the championship? The first part of that was pretty seamless. University gave them a little bit of a game. Triumph gave them a game. And then they got exactly what they knew they would get from Contreras. And now, after they've handled that, now the last step in that process is George Washington Prep. These are two teams that have had their eye on each other all season long because they knew they would have to get through each other in some form of capacity to win the Division III championship. So it's great when a plan comes together or when a story comes together where it's two teams that are sort of knocking on that door to a championship and they ultimately get there. It should be a fun game. It should be a highly competitive game. And like all these matchups, we'll be right there to tell the story because it should be a fun one.
Yeah, and that takes us right to another number 1 versus number 2 matchup in the final, and that's what we have here in D4. Number 1, Valley Academy of Arts and Sciences, VAS, is taking on Robert F. Kennedy. And, VAS survived a bit of a scare in the first round against Sun Valley. 6-point win there. 10-point win against Alliance. And then upset-minded New West, who, had a tough one against Community Charter, 2-point win. But VAS escaped. And Robert F. Kennedy hasn't been challenged at all in this playoff. They beat East Valley by 30 points in the third round. They beat Larchmont by 21 in the semis. So another one of these matchups like we had earlier where you have a team that has kind of seemingly coasted in versus a team that's fought its way in. But still it's a number 1, number 2. So you expect it to be very evenly matched. You expect it to be a dogfight. I don't think RFK believes they're going to coast through this one. But again, they haven't faced adversity in a few weeks. So what's going to happen if they face it?
Yeah, the story here and the story coming into this bracket, which to me, I felt like I was cheating, picking Robert F. Kennedy to win D4 because all season long I've kind of looked at them sort of funny because I didn't really understand why they were considered a D4 program when they competed in Division III last season. They were highly competitive, and they've been highly competitive this year, which is why they are the number 2 seed here in Division IV. When you could make the argument that maybe they should have been the overall top seed and they should be the ones hosting this game. And quite frankly, you got to give them credit. They have performed and competed and made a statement throughout this playoff bracket that, hey, no, we're the ones to beat here. Like they're beating opponents by an average of 30 points is nothing to sneeze at. And it looks like that is definitely a mountain to climb for VAS. Now, luckily for VAS, they get to host this matchup. So that will help in terms of what you've got coming in the door to face you for this championship. But it's really, in my opinion, it's RFK's to lose. They've been awesome throughout the playoffs. But if there's any team that might be built to give them some trouble, it's the rugged nature of this VAS team. Because, like I said, if you look at their schedule and look at how they've played this year, they make games ugly. Like they're not getting into a track meet. They're going to muck things up and really make you get down in the mud with them. And maybe that's what you need against a team that's superiorly talented. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting one to see unfold. I don't think that Robert F. Kennedy is going to beat VAS by 30 points like they've kind of run through the rest of the field. But it's going to be up to VAS to see to bring their A game to make this competitive as it can be and it should be.
Yeah, very, very much so. And we roll right into D5, and we have yet another 1 versus 2 matchup here in the final. Fremont hasn't really been challenged at all. It's interesting saying that with some of these teams that were the top seeds. You kind of think maybe they should have been a league up, but they were seated as they were, and Fremont is in. And Camino Nuevo was the number two. They survived a couple scares. Discovery from Pacoima in the second round um, put up a fight, but it was a 6 point win for Camino Nuevo. And then in the semis, they outlasted a Fauché team that was used to playing tough. It was a 31-30 victory for Camino Nuevo, and that punched their ticket. They're in. This will be an interesting one. Part of me says don't be surprised if Fremont runs through them the way they have. But I mean, looking at the scores, Camino Nuevo is going to want to play a low-scoring game. They're going to want to play a tight defense. They're going to want to muck it up a little bit, not give a lot of room to Fremont. And if they can do that, this could be a tight game and they could steal it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have much more to add to that other than, yeah, it's similar to RFK. I'm looking at Fremont like this is their game to lose. If they come out and play the way that we've seen them compete here in this bracket, they should win this one going away. This game should be a culmination, but you have to roll the balls out there and play. And that staff for Camino Nuevo, they're going to have something in store to kind of try to muck this game up a little bit, because that's what they need to do to compete. But like I said, all things equal, I expect Fremont to come out here and prove that, like you said, they probably could have and should have been a D4 team this year. But you place where you place, and you got to play who you play, and it's their championship to lose.
Yep. And like we've been saying for the last 6 months, get out there. These are the finals now. And these teams are playing for something big. They're playing for themselves. They're playing for school history. There's plenty of reasons for these young men and women to be cheered on. So you guys did great in the semis. You packed those gyms, and get out and do it again. One more time for these basketball games. Pack it. Let these kids know that these championship games are important. Yes, they're getting a trophy at the end. They know it's important. But make the environment feel special. Do it again. Get out. We're telling these stories. We're cheering all of them on. Go on, cheer your kids out. They might be your neighbors. They might be your kids. They might be in the community. What have you? Get out. Cheer them on. Do it again. And we'll keep sharing the love like we've been doing.
Yes, sir. The only thing I'm going to add to that is, listen, the weather's shaping up like it's going to be bad. You ain't got nothing else to do. Go to these gyms and support these kids. Ant-Man can wait. If you haven't seen it already, shame on you. You should have went and saw Jonathan Majors night one, but that's another conversation for another day. Go pack these gyms. Go see these kids compete. That atmosphere at Birmingham was so awesome to see so many people in there. There were coaches from other teams there just to support Polly. I saw Panorama's coach in the gym. I sat next to the Grant coaching staff watching that game. Go out and support these kids. Go to PCC. Go to Birmingham. Go to Voss. Go see these teams play, and let them know that we love them and we support everything from the boys and the girls side, that we see what you're doing here in the city section, and we show you guys the same love and make sure you know that you're loved and important.
And on that note, we will see you all next week. Keep showing the love, because we will be. And when we see you, we'll be wrapping up these finals. Take it easy.
Peace.